U.S. intelligence agency, mind control.
Mother of all battles.
He's already got the bisexual lighting plus.
And some argue that its television coverage changed the face of war. It's hard to get everyone to agree when it comes to the first Gulf War. The media attention for Saddam Hussein dates back to August 2, 1990, when the Rais ordered his troops to invade the neighboring Kuwait, a small emirate of only 18,000 square kilometers, with 4.5 million inhabitants, largely living in the capital al-Kuwait, but very rich in oil fields. War broke out.
Can we talk about how they colored outside the lines?
On the night of January 16, 1991, after a series of ultimatums from the United Nations asking for the withdrawal of Iraqi forces from Kuwait. However, a conflict that didn't last long, 6 weeks, just long enough for a coalition of 34 countries led by the United States to showcase its overwhelming superiority by deploying over 500,000 troops and forcing the Iraqi leader to
yeah, I mean, who else can, though?
Surrender the following February 20th.
Not only all like that many troops, but like look at how many come from just like other countries that the U.S. is also like, you know, planning and command structure with. Like the U.S. is like unbeatable with diplomacy, whether it's for war or anything else. It's insane that they are able to do something like this. The first invasion of Iraq is like a spectacle. Like it shouldn't be possible. Like humans should not be able to do what happened there. And for all we know, only the United States can do something like that.
It was an intense few weeks, however, and the relentless news coverage ended up making the first Gulf War a real media event. In particular, it was always in the spotlight of CNN, an old news channel established just over 10 years earlier, which imposed itself on the eyes of the world by providing continuous news coverage of the progress of Operation Desert Storm, the actual military action against Iraq, preceded by Desert Shield, or the massive deployment of troops to Saudi Arabia to contain Iraqi ambitions. Television coverage that influenced US foreign policy decisions to the point of affecting the course of the conflict, according to what has been called the CNN effect. Then we come back to it. Before the fateful day of the invasion, no one had been more concerned about the Iraqi leader, even though he had been leading the Ba'ath regime from the secular, socialist-inspired Ba'ath Party since 1979. No one, in the context of numerous meetings among top politicians in the Arab region held on the eve of the invasion, guessed or wanted to guess that Iraq would prove to be an important player on the international stage, and that its dictator's policies would pose a threat to the world order. Certainly, the crisis triggered by the invasion of Kuwait can be regarded not only as one of the major international crises of the post-war period, but also as a unique event. Indeed, it's the first major post-Cold War crisis to be located.
Why didn't you just chop Saddam then? Okay, so the end of the Gulf War is one of, I think, the worst things America has done in their modern history is how they concluded this war. Their fundamental belief was that if they took out Saddam, it would empower Iran in the region. So they coalitioned with all these people to build a coalition. You know, even George Bush Jr. says it, the coalition of willing. Why do you think that fell apart? Because 10 years earlier, you told people the same thing, and then he left them to Saddam. Like the genocides that happen are literally a result of Saddam lashing back against these people inside Iraq who we said we would protect if they helped us. A lot of people died because America did that.
Outside the dimension of East-West confrontation. For the first time, a member of the United Nations, Kuwait precisely.
That's something I only learned like this year is the Ukraine involvement in the Iraq War. A lot of Ukrainians were taken hostages in comparison to other countries as well when they got to that hostage period of 2005, 2004.
hadn't just been invaded, but totally occupied and annexed by another, causing hundreds of thousands of displaced people, disruption of trade of two major oil producers, and worldwide economic uncertainty. If we analyze the scale of this war in terms of casualties, we find that it's far less than that of the major wars after 1945. Think of Korea with 4.3 million dead, Vietnam with over 2 million, the Iran-Iraq war with over 600,000, or Lebanon with 250,000. But from the point of view of mobilization and armaments used, this was, after Korea, the largest interstate conflict since World War II. Militarily, we can identify three distinctive features.
By mobilization, America used such unrelenting force.
The first is the extreme asymmetry of casualties, facilitated by the rise of new technologies. Tens of thousands of casualties on the Iraqi side, a few hundred on the coalition side. The second is the particular way the...
See, because this is, key in your RTS, is you need to wait and kick in so your assault hits right when your upgrades finish, So as soon as you get those upgrades, you want to be pushing into the enemy base right when those upgrades pop. So you want to have your attack timed out perfectly for that, And this is what happens when you do that correctly.
Conflict ended with the sudden call for a halt by George Bush Sr. at a time when he could have annihilated Saddam altogether. The third, and maybe most dramatic, is the ecological disaster that came with it, following the Iraqi decision to set fire to Kuwait's oil fields during the retreat. You remember the famous scene from the movie Jarhead, don't you?
Jihad?
It's raining oil! It's raining oil, fellas!
Okay. Don't get us copyright, bro. Maybe that's why he put this loud music on top of it. Great. Epic YouTube. Great YouTube. This is what happens when you try not to get copy struck. It just stops working. Ugh, right when I was about to hit refresh, it turns black. Go ahead. You can do it. All right, I'm refresh. Oh, right when I clicked refresh! I fucking hate it. Oh, fuck off.
It sounds fun. Destruction went hand in hand, but in this case, the destructive found no military justification and was devastating to the healthiness of the air.
This video sucks, bro.
Over a large area of West Asia. But exactly when did the hostilities date back?
Bad, is it?
Fateful August 2, 1990 is only the culmination of a process rooted in September 1980, when war operations between Iraq and Iran began, resulting in a conflict that cost more than 500,000 dead, and ended with neither winners nor losers, but a ceasefire requested by Tehran on August 8, 1988. Of this conflict, the American public, but not the government and secret services, of course, knew almost nothing, just as it was barely aware of the geopolitical rise of Saddam Hussein's Iraq. A military power, to be exact, the fourth largest in the world by number of armed forces, after the USSR, China, and the United States. 55 divisions, 1 million trained men, 500,000 aircrafts, and 5,500 tanks. But it was a power with disastrous public finances, with an accumulated debt of $100 billion in 1988, due to the government's huge military expenses during the 8 years of bloody war. Wow. A debt that couldn't be repaired, even by attempting to promote the private sector and domestic...
This could all be shortened down a lot. Like, a lot of this could be, like, just basically 2 sentences about the invasion being, like, totally responsible because of his military spending, and he needed to get his debt back. Like, if you were to ask me what caused the first Gulf War, I would say Saddam's debt. Easy.
Agriculture. But Saddam was convinced that the economy would recover, believing he could count on the support of oil lords Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. In fact, the 3 countries, along with the United States and Israel, had supported in various forms the Iraq-Iran war of the late 1980s to contain Shiite fundamentalism provoked by the Khomeini revolution, and Saddam expected them to honor their debt of gratitude for benefiting from Iraq's protective shield against the Iranian threat. In response, there was a rush to drain the oil fields and the release of large quantities of oil onto the market, causing its price to plummet from $18 to $13 a barrel. But the initiative taken by Kuwait was the straw that broke the camel's back. You should know that since the 1930s, Iraq had repeated...
That policy was literally what Trump came in and forced Iraq to do to lower global oil prices.
$20 a fucking barrel.
You know, it wasn't that type of saturation, but that really hurt Iraq's economy when Trump did it. And it also hurt a lot of actual oil economies. That hurt our economy, but it hurt like the entire cartel and OPEC. You think that was good to do for oil prices? You think they're not going to recover those profits later? So this whole thing about Trump bringing down gas prices, sure, just like businessmen, they only think in the short term. They don't care about long-term effects of policy.
Repeatedly claimed the sovereignty over Kuwait, on some occasions denying its legitimacy as a separate state, on others questioning the boundary delimitation between the two countries, because the way the United Kingdom had drawn its border back in 1923 prevented Iraq from controlling a proper outlet to the Persian Gulf, corresponding to the disputed Bubiyan and Marba Islands, and the piece of desert where the Rumaila deposit is located, crossing the border between the two states.
Yeah,
and always.
So these oil fields on the border of Kuwait here, they're literally the same oil field. The line is drawn through the oil field. So like before this even happened, like there would be contractors that would work on both sides. Like the border didn't really exist. They would have lunch together and stuff, but they would be two different countries' workers.
Was claimed by Iraq. We said in the aftermath of the ceasefire demanded by Tehran, Kuwait, contravening the extraction quota agreements established at OPEC, Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries, increased crude oil extraction from the Rumaila fields. This episode, known as oil theft through slant drilling, which
didn't happen. This didn't happen. Slant drilling like this is like not even it's such a silly thing to say, because the oil fields, like, it's the same field. This whole like slant drilling narrative. This is a narrative that's pushed by Saddam's propaganda and rhetoric. This is just like not really a thing. This whole like, you know, that there will be blood slurped up our oil type of thing.
Particular extraction technique
like
using
non-vertical. Like I said, the people who were working on these fields like didn't even see a difference or a hard border going through the fields and stuff.
Drills brought more than $2.4 billion into the country's treasury, corresponding to about 300,000 barrels of oil per day, an action that collapsed Baghdad's revenue, which was...
Yes, the mercenary we had on did make that argument, but I'm not sure if I left it in the cut thing, but I believe I did put stuff on screen like that was to the contrary of what he said. But the thing is that it doesn't matter if it happened or didn't happen. This is just what Saddam argued to go to war anyway. Like, of course, some of the stuff would be inaccurate. Saddam really needed to pay off these debts that he had. So he saw the solution being violence. I mean, the U.S. often thinks of violence being a solution. I'm not saying, like Saddam was right or justified in this comparison. I'm saying normally invasions are always unjustified and they find some excuse.
Was 90% dependent on crude oil, by about $7 billion a year, while interest on the debt also amounted to $7 billion. In fact, none of the Gulf countries came to Saddam's aid by proposing to negotiate less onerous forms of debt repayment, despite the Rais's constant requests to ease the pressure. So the invasion of Kuwait would offer a multi-layered solution: a distraction from domestic discontent over economic mismanagement, the possibility of acquiring Kuwait assets and investments, and the seizure of the oil field.
Yeah, I mean, that's basic. I mean, yeah, that's what I was saying. You know, like he had reasons for doing it. It wasn't just because he was evil, which I think a lot of people say like he did it because he's just crazy. No, he is crazy, but
themselves, which was equivalent to controlling about 1/5 of all world oil. Saddam's hostility found oil on an important occasion.
Yeah.
At the Arab League,
this is the war that was about oil.
on July 16, 1990, Iraqi Foreign Minister Tarek Aziz delivered to the League's Secretary General Shabik Libi a memorandum in the shape of a declaration of war, accusing Kuwait of stealing oil and the remaining Gulf countries of plotting an economic conspiracy against Iraq, aimed at putting it out of business once and
It's called OPEC, bro.
for all. We can say that the Iraqi dictator, already supported in the past by the West, was convinced that his move would have no practical consequences, apart from the usual ritual protests. This is confirmed by the July 25, 1990 summons of US Ambassador April Gillespie. Saddam gave her barely an hour's notice. Gillespie didn't make it in time to ask the State Department for instructions, and the dialogue between the two resolved into a comedy of misunderstandings. Too absorbed in the problems of the East, the diplomat implied that the US didn't want to intrude on inter-Arab disputes. The Iraqi dictator, convinced that he had made these intentions clear, believed he had obtained the tacit US green light to invade Kuwait.
This is a little bit too much Saddam apologia coming from this guy at this point. Yeah, dude, it totally wasn't a setup for him to like twist the situation from the beginning. He just thought he was made clear. Fuck you.
Mistake that would cost Iraq dearly, which from the time of the coalition ground attack dated February 24, 1991, lost control of Kuwait in just 4 days. Very controversial were the US airstrikes on the night of February 26, 27, directed against Iraqi forces retreating from al-Quaid to the city of Basra. The Allies initially bombed the head and tail of the huge column.
Now look at the cars here. Are these military vehicles? You know, Palestinians were killed here too. It wasn't just military assets killed. That's why it's controversial. If it was just military hard targets, nobody would give a fuck at the end of the day.
Of vehicles traveling on the so-called highway of death, so as to block the convoy and make it a static target for subsequent attacks. Some commentators suggested that the use of force had been disproportionate, since the Iraqis had agreed to withdraw in compliance with UN Resolution 660, and the convoy included Kuwaiti prisoners, politicians, and Palestinian civilian refugees. In any case, Saddam remained in power, cracking down hard on Kurdish uprisings in the north and Shiite uprisings in the south, but had to accept the UN resolution.
Yeah, so that's who knows? Who knows how much civilian was there?
687, pledging to destroy his arsenals of unconventional weapons, pay reparation for war damage.
Russians are always commandeering cars and shit like that. Like even during the invasion, they did it.
And abide by two security zones created by the coalition, for Kurds and Shiites precisely. The Allied victory, though described by almost all the Western press as challenging but fair, with Saddam Hussein compared to Adolf Hitler and his fearsome army to the Wehrmacht, was easy and with very few casualties. The whole thing, as we shall see, was peppered with a campaign of mystification in the Western press to justify the military intervention, and a spectacular live broadcast by journalist Peter Arnett from Baghdad's Rashid Hotel, describing the bombing for hours.
How are you going to make a pro-Saddam anti-American video and not go, oh, because then he would have to admit Saddam did genocide and all that shit. The real crimes that America committed, they can't talk about because it fucking implicates us letting Saddam do things.
It was the first time it happened on live television, and many, including the Italian historian Antonio Scurati, say that this contributed to the viewers' lack of empathy for the war, who from then on became accustomed to seeing death and bombs on the screen, not as a chilling loss of life, but as an effective distraction against the boredom. The Allied victory was easy, but Bush was unable, or maybe unwilling, to take advantage of the internal tensions in Iraqi society to deal a decisive blow to Saddam. It was felt that a tame but not ideologically fundamentalist enemy could still come in handy later against possible unrest caused by peoples bordering the Iraqis, apparently friendly but actually hostile. We mustn't forget, then, that a large section of Islamic public opinion spoke out in...
What?
Burrito.
What about... Huh?
I'm so hungry. I have a burrito.
Of Saddam himself, seeing the coalition's presence as an unwelcome Western interference in Middle Eastern affairs and damage to the holy sites of Islam. Saddam, after having always been utterly secular and completely indifferent to religion, knew how to sniff the wind of God.
Oh, this is when he writes the Quran in blood. Because he sells it. He actually sells it as they won the Gulf War.
That sounds very anti-Islam.
He said they won because they were too scared to go all the way with him.
Okay.
And began to pose as a protector of Islam, attending public prayers, waving the rhetoric of faith.
He even took the pistol out of his holster there. Wow.
Damn.
regime survived, but internal rivalries, Kurdish independence, Shiite discontent were never quelled and came back to the surface during the Second Gulf War. That's another story. Now is the time to talk about CNN effect, but before we get there, let's see how American and its allies' intervention in a conflict that was taking place on the other side of the world was justified. The Bush administration tried to convince world opinion that a real threat was imminent, and the Saudis that an American presence in the Gulf was inevitable. On August 15, 1990, it was George Bush Sr. himself who advanced the first rational explanation. Our jobs, our way of life, our freedom, and that of friendly countries around the world would suffer if control of the world's great oil reserves fell into the hands of that one man, Saddam Hussein. Reasons that seemed far-fetched. There was no real threat to freedom, except, as historian Theodore Draper put it, to that freedom to drive your car on cheap fuel. But interests in the Gulf area didn't stop at oil. Take, for example, the massive
people really put way too much credence in when Americans say the word freedom.
Yes,
like
they do.
it doesn't like mean anything to us. It's like fucking calling tissues Kleenex. You know? Like it doesn't actually, we don't actually acknowledge like anything that is like freedom or anything like that. Like it's just a word that you throw in there to be like, it's American. Like it's just synonymous would be saying like, this is American. Like this is American power, you know? Like freedom doesn't mean anything here. It means something in other countries. To us, it's just a fucking word we attach to the US government that we put on the fucking high hill. Isn't that the expression? On the hill type thing? Who was saying that? Some commie.
Chemical arsenal in the hands of Saddam Hussein. Historical reconstructions show how Western aid was instrumental in the development of the Iraqi weapons program, mentioning more than 2,000
city on a hill. Yeah, I remember I was getting pissed because somebody like Bad Empanada kept saying it or something, or the Second Thought or something.
Companies involved in various ways in the formation of the Iraqi war industry. Washington has long denied possessing information regarding the chemical arsenal in the hands of the Rais, but recent studies prove otherwise. On August 23, 2013, Foreign Policy published a survey showing top-secret documents in hand that the US was aware of the existence of these weapons as early as 1980.
Gross. It says nerve gas attacks.
And was constantly monitoring Saddam Hussein's plans for a chemical attack on Iran, which would have banned Tehran in 1988 through the use of sarin gas and mustard gas. The CIA had information
both of those things are not gases.
that for decades remained in the secret archives, and about which the government was always silent, even strongly condemning the use of these instruments of war, which, moreover, was prohibited by the Geneva Protocol of 1925.
No, this is exactly what it is. That's what it is. It's like, when we talk about freedom, it's like hearkening back to using our guns to, like, overthrow tyranny and stuff. You know? The word freedom is so ingrained in our, like, national myth culture. Freedom has too many syllables for them to understand. Yeah, and especially for us, you know, it's like invisible syllables there.
Ratified by the United States in 1975. Prior to that survey, it was known that the US had provided Iraq with intelligence support, and that there was only suspicion that the chemical arsenal was being used in retaliation for war.
We knew the chemical weapons were there for a long time. We have video of the Camisea Depot, inside the Camisea Depot, and we can see in clear writing where some of those chemical weapons are from, with the chemical codes, the chemical bans on them. We knew these weapons were there. We knew where they came from. And even outside the US, there's already been document leaks before that. We knew that they're smuggling weapons through the Czech Republic, which at the time was like Czechoslovakia and all this stuff. Like the Czech Republic has been a historic arms smuggler for us. We knew that Jordan was also participating in these arms smuggling to get these weapons to Saddam. So, and then we also know about the fucking chemical weapons being offloaded from the UK from footage the US government took inside the Camisea bunker that is public, that they released to press. Literally worst kept secret.
Than suspicions, awareness. In fact, some declassified documents extracted from the National Archives in College Park, Maryland, show how senior US officials had been briefed about the extent of the nerve gas attacks. As journalist Shane Harris,
it's not gas.
It's not gas.
officials had been...
What's the date on this?
Yeah, no, the
1984.
burritos don't compare. 84
Look, and it says use of nerve agent.
agent. Yes, that's correct.
Begun
And he
using
says
nerve
gas.
agents on the A2 Beria front, and likely will be able to deploy it in a artillery sufficient quantities by late this fall. The Iraqi nerve agent capability could be a significant impact on Iran's human wave tactics, forcing Iran to give up that strategy. Iraq's use of chemical weapons alone is not likely to result in an Iranian acceptance of negotiated settlement. However, as long as Ayatollah Khomeini remains in power, nerve agent use still classified here. So,
Interesting. But I had a when I was in South Carolina, I had a burrito. It was legitimately like this big. Thing was fucking crazy. Under $10. Couldn't fucking believe it. You just can't find anything like that here. Also, have you not seen me eat them on the stream?
no, because you're too shy to eat on stream. You turn off your camera because you're self-conscious.
I do eat on
briefed about
stream.
the
What are you
extent of the
talking
nerve
about?
gas
No, you turn off your
attacks. As
camera.
journalist Shane
No, I
Harris
just have it
argued,
angled
this
so
amounted
when I'm
to a
eating,
tacit
it's
US
not on
admission of complicity
screen.
in one of the most gruesome chemical weapons attacks ever launched, in open contrast to the Geneva Protocol already mentioned. And what about diplomatic relations between the United States and Iraq? Well, they were put at risk even before the outbreak of the war. On February 15, 1990, Voice of America, the official radio and television service of the US government, broadcast a program appealing to the public for a general mobilization against authoritarian regimes around the world. Iraq was mentioned almost constantly, and Saddam was portrayed as one of the worst expressions of tyranny. An apology came immediately from Washington, but the matter was never digested by the Iraqi leader. An apology...
Okay, Voice of America can write about whatever the fuck they want. The government isn't telling them to do this propaganda.
That Glaspie also made to him, remember, the American diplomat, for how he had been portrayed in the interview conducted by Diane Sawyer on ABC News, claiming that that was the typical journalistic method used to discredit any political figure. But how far did the news media go? The news outlets succeeded in legitimizing the US military intervention in the Gulf, overnight transforming Saddam Hussein from a friend of the West to the embodiment of Adolf Hitler, endorsing George Bush Sr.'s line of thinking. Think that the New York Times, in an editorial published on August 9, 1990, stated that President Bush has drawn a line in the sand, committing US forces to face down Saddam Hussein. The costs and risks are enormous, but on balance, he has made the right choice in the right way. Saddam had
Okay, U.S. criticism of Saddam's coup. First thing that comes up is this foreign policy article when I just Googled that. Come on, just let me read the headline. CIA files prove America helped Saddam as he gassed Iran. Okay. This is... I said U.S. criticisms of his coup. Plot to overthrow Saddam in 2005. Saddam Hussein. Okay.
Can't say anything.
I know, I'm just reading. While many have thought Saddam first became involved in the U.S. intelligence agencies at the start of 1980 Iraq-Iran war, his first contacts with U.S. officials date back to 1959. No shit! When he was part of a CIA-authorized six-man squad tasked in assassinating then Prime Minister. Okay, Saddam was involved in the coup. Okay. Wow, we picked a fucking military strongman to do a coup. But what I'm trying to find is the fucking the actual coup, which nobody even knows happened. How Saddam takes power.
Yeah. He was being shown chemical facilities.
Yeah, no, he literally broadcasted it live.
Amazing.
Okay, 1979. Outbreak of war. Factions including, a coalition of Syrian Ba'athist and Syrian Muslim Brotherhood, which opposed the Alawite-dominated Ba'ath Party rule in Syria. It also supported Islamist revolts in Syria in 1980. So, this is just about Assad aligning with Saddam. Because I'm trying to find like when the Kurdicism first came in from the United States, because back then it's true that there wasn't a lot of reporting,
officially become a US problem, and the proof lies in the fact that in the time span between August 2 and November 8, 1990, the Washington Post and the New York Times began to cover Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and Kuwait constantly. The former published a total of over 1,700 articles on the subject, and the latter over 2,400, with a focus on news events, obviously ignoring the real reasons for the conflict and why US-Iraq relations had worsened in recent years. In short, an apt comparison that resonated with the people, accepted by 6 out of 10 Americans, as reported in a poll conducted between August 9...
Are we trying to say that Saddam Hussein isn't comparable to Adolf Hitler?
The Ba'ath Party is literally Nazis.
And 10, 1990 for the New York Times. For the television industry, on the other hand, the Gulf War was more of a story of American prowess, especially a celebration of technological power. It's estimated that 17% of the images shown were shots of missiles and cutting-edge war technology. Consider that on January 22, 1991, CNN spoke of the Patriot missiles as if they were human actors, but it was also a glorification of the courage, determination, and skill of American soldiers. If, with Vietnam, television had brought to light the atrocities of war, something different was happening with the Gulf. A narrative marked by the opposition between good and evil was adopted, packaged within a real show, complete with custom logo and music to accompany the reports. A show expertly hosted by CNN. The green light for Operation Desert Storm came when New York was minutes away from 7 p.m. on January 16, 1991. The news network sprang...
Okay. This is 1976 that I found here. And it says, it's not really this guy's great or anything that the CIA is saying here. But it's like years since the party established power in 1968, because the Ba'ath Party establishes before Saddam takes it over. Party leadership has held and established a relatively stable regime in a country long noted for disunity, instability, and high levels of political violence.
Yeah.
So the position of leadership has been enhanced by recent successes. Dramatic hike in petroleum prices, the defeat of the Kurds, according with Iran in 1975. These established have enabled the Iraqi government to initiate new approaches in its domestic and foreign policies not feasible in the early years of its rule. I mean, it's not exactly like pro or against, you know what I'm saying? Deliberate isolation of the regime plus long break between relations and the U.S. and Iraq. What's that? Right here in the write-up that they gave in 1976. So... a study concludes with the examination of current Iraqi foreign policy goals and their implications for U.S. interest. The deliberate isolation of the regime plus a long break in diplomatic relations between the U.S. and Iraq were severed in 1967 and is only since 1973 that a small U.S. interest section has operated in Baghdad. Impose several limitations on this paper. Issues lacking significant and accurate documentation are noted in text.
Interesting.
Iraq's image in the U.S. in recent years is a potential troublemaker in the Middle East, traditional foe of the states friendly to the U.S., and a violent, often turbulent country ruled by ideologues. Iraq's relations with the Soviet Union, plus considerable oil reserves, provide other elements of uneasiness to Western policymakers. This image is not wholly inaccurate, but the reality of Ba'ath-ruled Iraq is changing as the regime sets in. Nonetheless, the complexity of Iraq foreign policy and domestic policies is formidable, and some aspects remain obscure. Doesn't sound too favorable to me.
Not really.
They're criticizing the relations with the PLO. They will they say, while they won't work with the U.S., we can still establish a policy through groups like OPEC here. Iraq will adhere to OPEC guidelines. None of the above applies to relations with Syria. Quarrels over their ideology are happening there as well. So they're saying that the Ba'ath is not unified to Syria. They hate them. Although the Iraq is ruled by the Ba'ath Socialist Party, according to the party tenets of unity, independence, and socialism, in reality, it is a more traditional, cautious set of assumptions determined by the regime's policies and actions. Iraq first, a theme which emphasizes the unity and stability of the state, the maintenance of the national self-interest, and the survival of the regime, is valid for the current rulers. Saddam Hussein hasn't even taken over yet, and they're doing these criticisms pre-Saddam. Epic. Okay, thank you, CIA. Great source as usual.
Time. On the first night of non-stop bombing, Americans were addicted to the images of war and didn't tear themselves away from the live broadcasts on CNN. This was because shortly after the attack on Baghdad began, all the networks lost their video link from Iraq. The only broadcaster to maintain it with its reporters was precisely CNN. On the screens were the images of three journalists: war correspondent Peter Arnett, reporter John Holliman, and TV anchorman Bernard Shaw. In fact, CNN in September 1990 had managed to obtain permission from Iraqi officials to install a 4-wire satellite phone, a device that could withstand signal loss. On January 17, all crews present in Baghdad, including CNN's, were asked to leave the Rashid Hotel, headquarters of the international press, marked as a coalition bombing target for the following night. Holliman and Shaw decided to leave, while Peter Arnett remained on site. The Rashid Hotel was never bombed, and for the next 2 weeks, Arnett was the only US citizen broadcasting information and interviews from Iraq via the 4-wire link carried on a truck, with the large CNN initials visible on the canopy, so that coalition planes wouldn't mistake the vehicle for a Scud missile shipment. So by the end of the month, CNN became the only news provider for more than 100 countries, the primary source of information from the Gulf. To ensure that CNN, as an all-news channel, could broadcast 24/7 news, 2 military analysts were hired on a permanent basis. Former Air Force Major General Perry McCoy-Smith and military strategy expert James Blackwell. It was Major McCoy-Smith, in one of his books, who explained the formula for the American broadcaster's success. CNN had the reporters, the satellite link-ups, the engineers, the producers, and expert commentators in place or on standby. It had a leadership team which understood, before the war broke out, that this was going to be a story of giant proportions. The job of the analysts was to always be at the broadcaster's beck and call, always ready to comment on the images, to explain the strategic meaning of a certain bombing, and the technical
capitalism.
Details about recon planes and missiles dropped on a variety of targets. A rather simple example explains the power of the media in influencing public opinion. On January 23, 1991, barely a week into the war, Major Smith, during a broadcast, recommended reading 3 books to better understand the strategies behind ongoing operations. All 3 sold out by the same evening, and publishers rushed with reprinting. One of the 3 titles boomed in demand and forced the publishers to reprint 600,000 copies. However, the power of CNN effect also affected foreign policy decisions. The case study is from February 1991 and is related to Kurdish refugees who had sought shelter from Iraqi forces in the mountains southeast of Turkey. Media coverage of the Kurdish crisis was intensive, emphasizing both the precarious conditions in which the Kurds were living and the demand that something be done to help them. The images shocked the feelings of world leaders. British Prime Minister John Major decided to take the issue to the European community and convinced first European partners and then President Bush to create humanitarian corridors in Iraq. And so began what would become Operation Provide Comfort, aimed at getting refugees from the Gulf War to safety. Barely a year after the conflict in the Middle East and moving elsewhere, the United States decided, under heavy media pressure, to intervene in response to the humanitarian emergency resulting from the Somali civil war. But in October 1993, everything changed. Images of a US soldier killed and dragged through the streets of Mogadishu quickly went around the world, prompting President Clinton to withdraw troops from the territory. John Shed.
It's so funny because that Mogadishu event is similar to the Blackwater Bridge incident, but Clinton responded by courtesy to pull people out. You know, because I look at the Blackwater Bridge incident as so one-sided. I don't look at a lot of people, like I've never thought to even look up people who were starting to call to leave the war after that happened. Like, I bet you there's a lot of that too. But that period of early internet is like where a lot of shit isn't backed up. Like, you can't find the paper archives or the internet archives and stuff. And like, there wasn't a lot of video press at the time. So it's very like, it's only like snippets of articles that are hard to source and things like that. But I bet it existed.
Assistant Secretary of State between 1993 and 1998, reveals how the media first brought the US into Somalia.
I'm still waiting for how Western media pushed for the war against Saddam. Where did that happen? We got 1 minute left, dude. Where was this in your video?
And then out of the conflict, according to
this guy's name is Shatfuck.
It makes sense.
the so-called push
What? This US guy, his name is Shatfuck.
and pull effect, but
John H.F. Shatfuck.
the ability of television to determine what rises to the status of an international crisis finds express confirmation in a sentence uttered by Bill Clinton on July 17, 1995, in response to the media call
What were those Kurds fleeing from?
for military intervention in Bosnia. We have a war
Here in my head, I was thinking, if I go to this guy's channel, are we going to find Bosnia apologia stuff?
Sounds
and
like
this video ends with, like, where was the media? Like, there's not, like, Democracy Now! Has done this story better. We literally brought somebody in who lied and said they were taking babies out of incubators and throwing them on the ground when Iraq invaded Kuwait. Where was that? There was literal, like, PSYOP campaigns, dude. What are we doing with this video? Like, this is like the most shittily done Saddam apologia ever. Like, they're trying so hard to not make it look like they're doing apologia for Saddam, but the entire thing, that's what it was. And you know when somebody brings up the slant drilling shit as, like, definitive evidence for Saddam, then it's like, then he's in that, like, mindset of, like, believing, you know, this guy probably believes that fucking depleted uranium did birth effects in fucking Fallujah.
Mm-hmm.
Our position is unsustainable. It's killing the US position of strength in the world. Well, even today,
notice how he said position of strength and not freedom.
To the end. I thank you all for your attention and see you in the next video.
Go fuck yourself. Go fuck yourself. Go fuck yourself. Okay, let's see what other shitty... Oh, he's got Singapore on here. Okay. I'm just going to add I'm going to add some of these to the list for next time so we can see. Okay.
Will you go through that? I'll start this.
Well, I'm just gonna let you know if there's anything
Scarlett
funny.
Johansson is tasked as the lead in an
Wait, I'm not ready. I need to pull up my fucking stuff first. I told you I won't be ready because I have to host the video instead of pulling.
Yeah, that's fine. We won't need it for this. This is just going to be a stupid fucking box video.
No. We're gonna look at this channel really quick. Evil. They throw evil on his head. Putin's puppet doesn't seem so bad there. The new Dubai. Okay. This one might be funny. It looks like this guy's just a fucking idiot. Then why China is obsessed with Taiwan. Is the United Nations a failed organization? Yes. It is. Yeah, this doesn't seem so bad. That's that what are hypersonic weapons? Okay, this one might be good too. Okay. Now I'm going to pull up reference materials for the videos.
Are you aware of a CIA psychological profile about you, sir? Would you be interested in hearing what the CIA had to say? This secret study portrays as a brilliant but dangerous megalomaniac who is likely to pursue his own aims in disregard of U.S. interests. He's an uncertain ally. Shall I go on, or would you prefer that I stop, sir?